Welcome back to Life's Journeys. I'm Dr. Ralph Smith. This is another edition of our program that we're going to present to you today, but feel free to hit our website, which is www.jennymwellness.com, and the Jenny is spelled with a G as in good. And you can view all of our shows over the last 4 seasons. Sean Bennett and I work together in these shows, and he runs that media division. So I answer to him. He's the boss, not me. This is a subject, and I pause because it's a very emotional subject with me. This is a subject I think is very, very important. And even though you may have raised those good families that we had talked about in previous life journeys, the one thing that will raise its ugly head is substance abuse. And today I'm going to talk about the different paths you can take to get a recovery from substance abuse. Now, some of the things I say are not accepted in all circles. So I must give you a little bit of disclaimer and say this is my advice. This is through my life experiences. This is through my training that I've received over all these years. But it's always good to seek a second opinion because I have a rather strong opinion on this particular matter, and I'd encourage you to do so. Now, to our court-ordered clients who will be watching this show, and what we do just for the rest of you folks out there, I know you're watching it on the internet. We have our own YouTube page now. We have different public access stations. I won't list all of them, but the point being is you catch this in different forms. But the bottom line to the story is I just tell you the way I feel, and it's from the heart. As you notice, when I look down at the paper, it's just to keep me on track on the focus subjects. None of this is scripted. So when I talk about recovery from substance, I'm going to bore you a little bit with some of stories that I can share with you, not only about my personal family, but examples I've had with patients of mine over all these years. And I say this without mentioning people's names because there are HIPAA laws that protect that. And I'll have to answer to Linda if she reads one of these programs or watches one of these programs, because she gets mad at me when I share family experiences. But recovery of substance abuse is, in my opinion, more important than even the economy. You know, you watch television news and you listen to all the different talk about the debt levels and people voting money in for this and that, and and thinking that's the news. That's not the news. The news is to provide a path for recovery of substance abuse. Let me prove my point. A lot of us talk about the homeless situation, how deplorable it is, how you hate having these people living in tents, parking their RVs and parking on your streets, defecating in the streets, living under bridges, road bridges, I almost said airport, but road bridges and stuff. But if you really look at this problem beyond your, what I call verbal part of the problem, the verbal point being how discouraging it is to even talk about this. Picture yourself in that environment. Do you know how most of those people got there? A lot of people, if you watch the news reports, say it's mental illness. The mental illness is what's causing all this gun violence. The mental illness is what's taking this society down a hole of no return. But there's a common factor that fits in almost every one of these cases, and that's abuse of substances. And it ranges anywhere from the typical DUI, which we'll talk a little bit in this presentation, to hard drug use from horse, which is heroin, meth, fentanyl. There's so many different drugs, I can't keep up with them. But the point being is the problem needs to be separated and discussed, each segment of it. There are a lot of people making a lot of money, because you can watch TV as well as I do, saying they'll cure you of this and they'll cure you of that, and they'll throw you in a 10-day program or a 30-day program. Let me tell you something. There are a few exceptions that they apply to those when you sign the contract. Let me talk about one exemption. They won't talk about a cure. They're going to teach you, and this is good, they're going to teach you how to maintain or moderate your use of these different substances. So let's jump in the first one that's a big one, alcohol. There are a lot of people that are carrying around DUIs today, and by a lot of people, at least 40% of the population, that based on what state you live, it has a direct impact on your life. For your first DUI, most states are very patient with that. They'll give you a 6-month license suspension. They'll require you to take so many classes from Jenny Marie Wellness. They might even force you to have a device in your car that you have to blow in, whatever the case, and probation. And to me, that's easy compared to what it leads to next. The next step, if you get a second DUI, and this starts getting really serious, they start suspending your license for a year. And who could have their license suspended for a year and still make a living? It's very difficult. You'd have to either have a very patient wife or a very good rapid transit system, because how can you go to work and be available to make a living? And if you can't work, you can't pay bills. And if you can't pay bills, and if rent and mortgage is a major part of that, that places an unfair burden on your partner. So that is a real tricky issue to manage. Plus, on top of that, your insurance rates, once you do get your driver's license again, will go through the roof. And you got to figure out how you can afford that. You know, Sean and I were talking in the car on the way to Olympia today about these credit card companies. They act like they're your friend. They want you to borrow money from them and use your credit cards. What they don't tell you is, if you're one day late, you're going to pay, a charge of anywhere from $30 to $40. Even if your payment's $22 a month, they're going to charge you $40. Well, substance abuse kind of falls in the same element. And more importantly, we're going to talk alcohol. In the state of Idaho, if you get your third DUI within 10 years, yes, folks, I'm saying 10 years. The old law used to be 5 years. You are a convicted felon. Think about that. How hard would it be to get a job or to rent an apartment or get credit or anything else being a felon? That's a serious charge. You would be a felon. And the state doesn't decipher what kind of felon you are. You're just a felon. In the state of Washington, we almost made the same mistake to regards they want to lower the drinking capacity, and by capacity I mean legal drinking, down to 0.5. Now, fortunately, it did not pass, and I testified against it. And people couldn't understand, Dr. Ralph, why would you testify against it? Look at all the business to get you. Believe me, if I was doing this for the money, I would have chosen another occupation. It's not about the money. It's about helping people and giving them a better life than they had before. And there's one element you've got to accept on this, and this is after a lot of years' experience. Alcoholism is a disease. It's not going to be cured overnight. It has usually quite a genetic link if you look back at it. So are you going to penalize somebody with a disease? You need to penalize them enough to keep the roads safe. I understand all that. I've got no problem with that. And there's got to be some punishment attached to it, or else people would drink like fish all the time. And by the way, when they make that expression, they're talking about taking water in their gills. Okay. But alcoholism is a disease. The most you can help for, I say helping someone to do, is to teach them to be a stabilizing factor, but maintaining their life to where they can be a functioning alcoholic. And I'm sure you've heard that before. The problem is, and it's a big problem, it's like a demon being locked inside your body, and you never know when it's going to come out. My family, on my dad's side, has a history of alcoholics. My dad was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. So when you have 3 lineages all being alcoholics, the chances are I could be subject to the same type of thing. How do I avoid it? I don't drink alcohol. And if I do drink alcohol and drink a glass of wine with the wife, there's 1 glass and that's it. So I don't know if it ever happened, but I'm not willing to take the risk. And I've given my children the same advice. And so far, I think they've accepted it. But you can't take any chances. And if you're not sure of the genetics of your family, and I don't think you need to use Ancestry.com to find this out, but be careful with that, because it does have a genetic link. Another link to alcoholism is stress factors. The number 1 factor that breaks up relationships, and I'm not just talking about marriage, I'm talking about relationships, is financial stress. And stress can take down the most solid relationships you have. It can take down your working relationship. If you do not know how to manage your stress, you've got problems. And if you think about it, a lot of the people that do drink that may not be alcoholics, they drink because they use it as a medicine. But they got to realize something. After they come off to their drunk or stupor, they're going to have the same problems. The stupor of being drunk is not a big thing. Not to the individual has to fight a problem. You got to fight the problem and get rid of the problem. So most people that I've worked with that are functioning alcoholics, you work very hard with that person to reduce the stress levels. You make their partner a partner in that. So they understand by creating, increased stress could increase the ability to drink. And that's just beyond beer and wine. It's also hard liquor, chasers. I mean, I'm not here to teach you how to be a bartender, but the point being is there's a lot of ways. There are a lot of people that feel to be happy and laugh. You got to drink. Most parties are like that. That's ridiculous. You enjoy your company you're with and the conversation you're with and the respect you might have for that person. That's what makes a party happy. It's not to see who can get drunk first. Now, it was a controversy when I made a few newspapers, when I testified against this new proposed law in Washington. Because there was one of the reasons they didn't talk about, and that's the science. To be drunk or legally drunk at 0.5, which is what the state of Washington was looking at, for an average woman who weighs 130 pounds, 2 beers or 2 glasses of wine would be enough to be legally drunk. Women do not metabolize liquor or alcohol as well as men do. But even a big guy like me, it might take 4 drinks, but still, it lowers that threshold of legality. And it was just too risky. Yes, it would create a lot of business for Ginny Marie Wellness, but my life's mission is beyond Ginny Marie Wellness, which means a lot to me. My mission is to help people live a good life, to keep marriages intact, to have children, and watch them carry your legacy through. Those are my marching orders. Those are my marching statements, per se. So when we deal with alcohol, I'm not saying you should just shut it off and say it's not important. It is important, but show some compassion. Most of these legal systems that we operate with, they'll require an alcohol evaluation. And in that alcohol evaluation, the evaluator will go through and determine what they feel is necessary to help a person manage their life. And they might say they want 32 hours worth of classes, or in our case, programs. They might do whatever, but every one of them say that you need to have a victims panel. A victims panel is a panel that's put together in a classroom environment. Usually Mothers Against Drunk Driving head this up, and their cause is good. Don't get me wrong. They want to save lives on the highway, and there's nothing wrong about that. But what they do is they show pictures of accidents, of human bodies being torn in pieces that you don't even want to think about, and that we're not going to discuss in this program, to drive home the point that drinking caused death. Drinking is danger. And I think that that's kind of preoccupied with a lot of these guys when they realize that when they are sitting there with their first DUI, that if they can control their drinking, who wants to have their license suspended for 6 months? Who wants to breathe into a machine to start their car? Who wants to be on supervised probation? Who wants to go through a victims panel? Who wants to pay all those court fines and pay attorneys retainers of $3,000 to $5,000? Unless you're addicted, and alcohol is addictive, why would you want to go through that again? Those are the negatives in life that you face when you drink. Some of the best commercials I've ever seen on alcohol, and I'm going to get off this subject in a second, I'm just very passionate about it, are the sentences, or the commercial that shows you driving a car, a cop pulling you over, and on the top of the screen it says, this could cost you $10,000. Because one thing most people understand is the value of money and how hard it is to make that money. And you've got to make the money in order to play that game. And it's a dangerous game. We talked briefly, very briefly, about stress factors. The number one stress factor besides finances is the death of a child. I haven't experienced that myself. I've worked with people that have gone through it, and it's hard for me to counsel on grief because I don't handle it well myself. But apparently, according to everything I've read, the loss of your own child is the most stressful factor you have. In fact, they've had studies to show that even though the divorce rate is around 50%, that the divorce rate among people who have lost children no matter what their ages are, is 75%. That's pretty significant. And yet what happens, instead of working with the couples and trying to find a common ground, most people address the issue of the child being lost. And really their priorities are a little screwed up. Their need or their mission is right, but they need to put the priorities into holding that family unit together, especially if there's other children involved. You just can't risk that. So one of the things that's important is to reduce stress. You know, and it's an easy exercise to do. You sit down and you put the kids to bed. This is not a family circle meeting, okay? This is just you and your significant other. And you ask the question. You say, honey, I want to give you a better life. And other than making $1 million a year, which I can't do, what are the things that I do that cause you stress? What are the things that cause you nuts? Now, if you ask those questions, you probably already know the answer. It could be as simple as taking the trash out, to you snoring at night, to who knows what, getting home late from being out with the boys and the girls. It goes both ways. But the factor is, find out what those stress factors are. Just 5. I usually do everything in 3s, except marriage. I got lucky, I got a good girl, and we've married 50 years. But I think in this particular case, you should have those 5 factors. And she should write them down, you should write them down. And then you put the papers together as adults, kids are in bed. This is not one of the conversations you want to have with kids present, because that makes them feel unstable. And kids in an unstable environment is just a stick of dynamite waiting to blow up. And you say, what can we do working together to eliminate these stress factors? And what can we do to get together again in 3 months and have these items off the list? And I guarantee you that in most cases, drinking will be part of that list. So you're not doing it just for yourself. You're doing it for the family unit. Now, there are obviously drugs that cause the same type of problems. There's prescribed drugs where someone hurts their back or suffers some type of physical injury. It could be oxy, it could be different drugs that taken in excess creates a dependence. And creating a dependence creates problems because your doctor and your pharmacy is only going to fill so many of those pills. So what do? You go outside the system. And you don't know, you have any idea. There could be fentanyl in there, you don't know. When you go outside the system, you're taking your life at risk. So one of the things you want to do is make sure that if you do suffer a physical injury or whatever, you take the least amount of pain medication you can. Now in the state of Washington, recreational use of marijuana is legal. I did one of our Life Journey shows at a drug house or a pot house store, we call it. And people say, why would you do that? Boy, I had people in Idaho that raised holy hell with me about that. But I did it so that people would understand why they have legal marijuana, not advocating it, but why they have legal marijuana. And the amazing thing about it is in the state of Washington, the evidence that we have seen so far is drunk driving is still number 1. It's not just people that are high on pot, but again, it's that damn alcohol. So having marijuana, especially when you're older, helps the coma, it helps with a lot of different elements. And I've never smoked marijuana in my life, nor will I do that. But the point being is, anything that is legal, that is properly managed, is not a crucial factor in your life. Let me say that again. Not abusing legal alcohol, legal marijuana, legal pain pills is not going to be a major factor in your life on the stress levels if you don't overdo it. And I think that's important for you to hear. And Lord knows there's enough drugs that we're talking about here that could be doing it. I mean, meth is widespread, cocaine is widespread. They glamorize it in the movies, which makes no sense to me, but they do it. And so one of the things that you got to do is you got to remember your genetics in alcohol. You've got to remember that you're setting an example for your children, like we talked about in previous shows. So don't act shocked if the kids see you using drugs, that they get in high school and start using drugs. They're modeling your behavior. So don't do it. It's just that simple. But the bottom line is whether it be genetics or overindulgence, the main factor is don't do it. And if you want to satisfy the process of recovery from substance abuse, which I'm going to give you the solutions when we get back from this break, you'll never have to worry about the solutions because you won't be in the middle of it. Believe it or not, people have gotten through their entire lives without ever using drugs. I'm an example of that. It doesn't make me a great person, but I came through the flower children and the hippies and the whole works, the wars in the 60s. It wasn't necessary. People offered me drugs. Why not, Ralph? And I said, I'd rather go with a natural high because I was too scared to use them. I was too scared to drink that Brew 102, that cheap cow, I won't use that term here, but the cheap beer they had in Southern California. I just didn't feel the need to do it. Thus, I didn't do it. I think I turned out okay. All right, let's take the break. And when we get back from this break, we're going to talk about some solutions. Not all the world is dark and gloomy. I brought some solutions to the party, and I'll share those with you right after this break. Welcome back to Life's Journey. I'm Dr. Ralph Smith, and we're just delighted you're with us today. Talking about a subject today that is not a subject people like talking about. They walk the talk sometimes, but they really don't like talking about this, and that's recovery of substance abuse. So let me give you some quick solutions that you might be able to use to kind of reduce your dependency on illegal drugs. Number one is drug rehab is good as long as it's a serious 30-day program. It's a good chance to get in your peer groups, to have certain types of medication, a lot of book reading, to understand the dangers of being involved with drugs, whether it be alcohol, whether it be the hard drugs, or whatever the case might be. Drug rehab is good for you, but make sure it's at least 30 days. And if you can get it on a voluntary basis, that's even better. Don't make the courts force you to do it, because then you got probation officers involved. Second of all, reduce the stress factors. We talk a lot about stress through this whole show. You know what your stress factors are. Reduce them. Either get those with the help of your partner or your significant other, but in either case, realize stress creates reactionary behavior. Reactionary behavior is drug and alcohol use. So stay away from it. You won't have to worry about it. The next thing is, which is really important, is to bring yourself in these treatment programs. One of the things that's very important, and I'm going to say this very slowly, is that you can get involved in a rehab program not because you're told to do it by the courts, not because your wife has been ragging on you or husband's been ragging on you. Do it for yourself. Go in there with an open-minded approach. It shouldn't be judgmental. All of us face our crosses that we bear when you're going through life. All of us make mistakes in our lives. Nobody's perfect. But go in there with the right attitude that you're there to learn. Because first of all, you've accepted that there's a problem. And that's the hardest part of this, is getting people to admit that there's a problem. And once you get past that barrier and you realize there's a problem, then approaching the solutions are critical. And rehab is one that you can look at. The treatment programs that they have online is a waste of money. Forget about it. Talk therapy, even though I'm a psychologist, I've been one for a lot of years, clinical psychology has its pluses. But doing it online, on the phone, it's a therapist who's looking you straight in the eye, who's saying to you exactly what you need to hear. Not to keep you feeling happy, or what I call feel-good therapy, where you just keep writing checks every week, but the type of therapy that says, look, I care about you, I love you as a human being, I want to get you on the right footing, and I realize you stumbled, but I want to give you right back on the path. Another option you have in here is churches. I don't think people talk enough about religion, and I'm not here to push you on any certain religion, but that church family can be critical for you. There's a lot of people that are in those church families. I mean, a lot. I'm talking about more than 50% that's having trouble with drugs or having trouble at work or having problems with a relationship or whatever the case might be. And sometimes to have the support of your church family is very, very important. No, you're not going to be protected by HIPAA laws, but the reality is if they're trying to help you, they're not being judgmental. And what you don't need is judgmental type of people or judgmental type of programs. So get your churches involved. And then finally, build a circle of friendship, peer friendship. And by peer, I'm talking about P-E-E-R. Buddies of yours, friends of your wife, that your wife has friends, or whatever the case might be, that they feel very comfortable in talking to them when they're challenged and where they're just seeking advice. Not decisions, but advice. They're not professionally trained. So I'm not saying they take the place of a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But what I'm saying, people that you just do things with and you say, boy, I don't know, Joe, if you've had this problem, but this has been my problem. And you listen to what Joe has to say. And you know what you're going to find out? You're going to find out that Joe faces a lot of the same problems you do. And maybe he had a solution, maybe not. That conversation may turn around to where he's asking you, well, what do you do? But either case, peer sometimes makes you think twice. And I'm not talking about peer pressure. I'm talking about the peer is relationship. So you've got your church, you've got your rehab programs, you've got your spouse, your family, your partners. You've got mental care professionals who are into mental wellness. And by seeing a psychologist, that doesn't mean you're mentally ill. That just means you need some help. You know, if you have a heart condition or you are suffering from cancer, you don't just look up at the sky and say, God, take care of me. You seek help from professionals that can help you. And when you're hooked on alcohol or you're hooked on substances, that is the first step in your recovery, is to be able to ask for help and then listen to what they have to say. That's my final word. It's on the subject. Take care of one another. God bless. And enjoy the world that God's given you. And every day you live is one other day that you have an opportunity to make a better life. Take care of yourself and others.